What this pastor did when he thought nobody was watching will restore your faith in humanity. In the heart of Texas Hill Country, tucked away in a close-knit community called Harmony Springs, something extraordinary happened that would forever change how an entire town viewed faith, trust, and second chances. The residents of Harmony Springs had always been deeply rooted in their Christian faith, gathering faithfully at First Methodist Church and cherishing the memory of Pastor Whitmore, their beloved shepherd who had guided them for almost 50 years. When 37-year-old Reverend Michael Harland arrived as their new spiritual leader, the community felt uncertain. Here was this young man from Chicago, educated, soft-spoken, and completely different from the thunderous preacher they'd grown accustomed to. Could this city outsider truly understand their ways? Would he be able to fill the enormous shoes left behind? Reverend Harland's early months were marked by cautious observation from his congregation. Unlike Pastor Whitmore's fiery sermons, Michael spoke of grace rather than judgment. He dressed modestly, delivered gentle messages, and chose reflection over rhetoric. Yet, week after week, he appeared at every hospital visit, every funeral, every community gathering, always listening more than speaking. Gradually, his genuine heart began winning people over. He learned everyone's routines: Miss Doy's Friday, peach preserve tradition, Joe Barnes's Wednesday prayer commitment, and the unwritten rule about Sunday's early town square closure. His seminary credentials from Emory and urban ministry experience mattered less than his authentic compassion. Michael taught confirmation classes to restless teenagers, maintained the church grounds when staff fell ill, and offered comfort to the grieving with remarkable patience. His note-free sermons wove Scripture into daily life, presenting forgiveness as a conscious choice and mercy as true strength. His voice didn't boom like thunder, but it lingered like gentle morning fog, staying with listeners long after they left. Among the townspeople, Evelyn Carter, a 72-year-old retired elementary teacher, became Michael's earliest advocate. This beloved widow of 11 years spent her days volunteering at the church office and her evenings baking for homebound neighbors. Known for her gentle wisdom and endless encouragement, Evelyn saw something quietly powerful in Reverend Harland's ministry. Michael reminded Evelyn of a former student, brilliant, kind, and consistently underestimated. She believed in him before others did, organizing coffee gatherings and welcome events while telling skeptical neighbors, "Just wait and see. The Lord brought him here for a purpose." Since her husband Robert's passing, Evelyn had found deeper meaning in church service. The sanctuary's quietness brought her peace, arranging altar flowers brought her joy, and visiting lonely community members gave her purpose. To many, she embodied the congregation's very soul. On a bright April Tuesday, Evelyn arrived early for her usual routine, the 7 a.m. prayer circle that provided her spiritual restoration. Sunlight filtered through the sanctuary's stained glass windows, painting the wooden pews in gentle colors. The holy atmosphere felt especially serene that morning. Inspired by the beautiful scene, Evelyn positioned her phone on the front pew and started a Facebook live stream on the church's page. She wanted to share this peaceful moment with those who couldn't attend: shut-ins, traveling families, and distant members. As soft hymn music played from her speaker, Evelyn knelt near the altar for her morning prayers while her phone continued, capturing the colorful light and her reverent figure. Then everything changed in an instant. Evelyn's hand began shaking. Sharp chest pain radiated down her arm. Her breathing became labored, and she grasped desperately at the pew for support before her strength failed. Her phone slipped to the floor, but kept streaming as she collapsed. Reverend Harland, entering. Through the side entrance, heard a soft thud and faint cry. Rushing forward, he discovered Evelyn lying unconscious near the altar, pale and still. Despite his panic, instinct took over. He knelt beside her, checked her weak pulse, called 911, and immediately began CPR, his hands pressing rhythmically against her chest while counting each compression aloud, with a shaking but determined voice. "Stay with me, Evelyn," he whispered, sweat forming on his forehead. He prayed not just with words, but with every breath and movement. desperately pleading for life to return to someone he cherished like family. Outside, church garden volunteers, finishing their morning work, heard the commotion inside. Peering through side windows, one woman gasped, seeing the pastor hunched over Evelyn's motionless body. Confusion and panic spread quickly. Miss Judy, the sacristan, ran to the bell rope and rang the old cast-iron church bell 3 times, an emergency signal unused for decades. The thunderous toll rolled across Harmony Springs. Storefronts opened, phones buzzed, and cars filled the church parking lot. Within 10 minutes, the sanctuary steps were crowded with concerned residents arriving in prayer and fear. Whispers began circulating. "She's not moving." What happened? Why was he alone with her? Doubt crept in, even among those who had previously supported Michael's sermons. Tension thickened as a sheriff's cruiser arrived and Sheriff Luke Hammond stepped out. Exhausted and breathless, Reverend Harland emerged from the sanctuary. "She collapsed," he explained. "I called 911 and performed CPR." But murmurs grew louder. She trusted him. Was she confronting him about something? "I always said he was moving too fast." The crowd's unease intensified, fueled by fear rather than facts. Meanwhile, across Harmony Springs, the live video continued streaming on Facebook. In living rooms, kitchens, and back porches, dozens of residents watched what they expected to be Evelyn's usual morning greeting. Instead, they witnessed her collapse and Reverend Harland's desperate life-saving efforts. No drama, no hesitation, just a man doing everything possible to save someone he clearly cared about. 17-year-old Alan Torres, a youth choir member, eating breakfast, watched the scene unfold with cold hands. Without hesitation, he grabbed his phone and ran toward the church. At the church, paramedics were loading Evelyn onto a stretcher, while whispered accusations grew darker among the crowd. Maybe he wasn't supposed to be there early. Did she confront him about budget cuts? Despite Reverend Harland's explanations, his words were drowned out by mounting tension and fear. That's when Alan burst onto the church steps, breathless and wide-eyed. "You're all wrong!" he shouted. The startled crowd turned as Alan held up his phone. "She was live streaming. It's all recorded here. He didn't hurt her. He saved her." Sheriff Hammond stepped forward, taking the phone as the crowd quieted. Played the footage, letting the audio fill the uneasy silence. They watched Evelyn set up her phone, greet viewers warmly, then kneel in prayer. They saw her gasp and collapse. They witnessed Reverend Harland rush to help, dial 911, perform chest compressions, and whisper urgent prayers through trembling breaths. No violence, no impropriety, just pure desperate compassion. The effect was instantaneous. Faces paled, mouths opened in shock, and several people lowered their eyes as earlier suspicions turned to shame. Miss Rita, one of the garden ladies, covered her mouth whispering, "Lord, forgive us." Others began murmuring apologies before anyone spoke them aloud. Reverend Harland stood with tense shoulders, unsure whether to feel relief or heartbreak. Evelyn was stable but unconscious, heading to Memorial Hill Hospital. The video left no doubt. There had been no wrongdoing, only heroism, but damage was done and guilt filled the room. Sheriff Hammond returned the phone to Alan, then addressed the crowd. "We all saw what happened, and we all owe Reverend Harland an apology." One by one, people stepped forward. Miss Dowie, who had quietly stopped attending services, reached for the pastor's hand with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. We were wrong." Joe Barnes, who had criticized Reverend Harland for being too modern, nodded solemnly. "You did right. By her, Pastor. God bless you." More followed with soft apologies, hesitant embraces, and regretful eyes. But Reverend Harland didn't scold or turn away. Instead, he listened to each apology, offered gentle nods, and replied with quiet sincerity, "I forgive you, not from duty, but from a deep well of grace, cultivated through years of hardship, prayer, and belief in the goodness buried in every human heart." Later that day, as machines hummed quietly around Evelyn's hospital bed, nurses explained what had happened. Though weak, when she heard about the live stream and accusations, she gently shook her head and whispered, Michael saved me." A nurse who had attended First Methodist as a child held her hand and smiled. We know. Everyone knows now. The following Sunday the church was packed. People who hadn't entered the sanctuary in years filled the pews. Not from curiosity, but from a need to make things right. Reverend Harland stood at the pulpit with his Bible open, his voice raw with emotion. He didn't speak of hurt or humiliation. Instead, he addressed forgiveness, our quickness to judge, the difference between truth and assumption, and grace's power not just to cleanse souls, but rebuild broken communities. Speaking gently with steady voice, he said, "What happened this week wasn't about me. It was about all of us. About what happens when fear overrides faith, when rumor replaces reflection. But it was also about what happens when truth speaks." And it spoke through an unexpected live stream, through a young man brave enough to shout it out, and through the heart of a woman who lived serving others. Evelyn didn't intend to become a lesson, but God uses everything, even our panic, shame, and mistakes. Sniffles filled the congregation, not from sadness, but release. Hands rose one by one in affirmation, not applause, but recommitment. Evelyn returned to church 2 weeks later, slower in step, but strong in spirit. When she entered the sanctuary, the entire room stood, not in fanfare, but respect. She walked down the aisle, paused beside the pew where her phone once sat, and gave Reverend Harland a quiet smile. He nodded back, and with that gesture, something in Harmony Springs healed. The town didn't forget what happened. The story became a parable passed from porch to porch, generation to generation, not just about the danger of false assumptions, but about truth's power and the miracle of second chances. Children grew up hearing about the day. Church bells rang in panic, but were answered by proof. When one small camera saved a man's calling, when the town nearly lost itself but found its soul again. From that Sunday forward, Harmony Springs shifted. People no longer hurried past each other with polite nods. They lingered in post-service conversations, looked each other in the eyes when speaking, and showed up not just for church but for each other. A quiet shame settled over the town in the days following the incident, but from that stillness rose deeper understanding, a rebirth that only comes after reckoning. The congregation began taking Reverend Harland's messages more to heart. Forgiveness, once casually mentioned, became a muscle they were forced to strengthen. People became slower to speak, quicker to listen. The local high school held gym discussions about assumptions and accountability. Sheriff Hammond, having seen his share of community crises, remarked to his deputy one afternoon, "Never thought a Facebook video would bring more healing than 100 town meetings." Reverend Harland never mentioned the incident in future sermons. Not directly. He didn't need to. The town had learned its lesson, and that morning's memory remained fresh in everyone's minds. Instead, he continued his usual work, visiting the sick, checking on single parents, attending school plays and bake sales. He quietly reinstated Evelyn's outreach schedule with younger volunteers inspired by her story. Evelyn herself, though physically slower, was sharper than ever in spirit. Her brush with death seemed to sharpen her sense of purpose. She started twice-weekly devotion groups over the phone for shut-ins and led a library session about legacy and kindness that drew surprising crowds of both seniors and curious teenagers. One crisp November morning, the church held a special service commemorating Pastor Whitmore's 10-year passing anniversary. Reverend Harland suggested Evelyn speak first. She stood at the pulpit, holding note cards but barely needing them, her voice softer but steady and clear. She spoke of memory, reverence, and change. "We thought no one could follow Pastor Whitmore. Maybe no one could. But God didn't send us a replacement. He sent us someone to help us grow into the kind of church Pastor Whitmore always prayed we'd become." When she stepped down, the room stayed silent for several beats, then rose to its feet. Not just for Evelyn, but for everything she'd endured, and everything they had all overcome together. The town began healing not just from the incident, but from deeper wounds, old grudges, outdated divisions, generational pride that had kept people apart in small but significant ways. People reached across aisles. The Baptist pastor and Reverend Harlan started monthly breakfasts together. The librarian and town mechanic organized a community reading group. Teenagers, once invisible in church, now led service projects. Even Sheriff Hammond noticed the difference. Crime hadn't changed significantly in Harmony Springs, but the town's tone had softened. People gave each other more grace, time, and benefit of the doubt. The church became a symbol not of scandal, as it might have been, but of redemption. The Facebook page that once streamed a crisis moment now featured daily reflections, scripture readings, and local kindness acts. The sanctuary remained open during weekdays for quiet prayer, always occupied by someone lighting candles, tying intention ribbons on the old wooden cross, or simply sitting in silence. People who once only came on Christmas and Easter started showing up in jeans on random Wednesday mornings just to sit in a pew and breathe. Despite the outpouring of respect, Reverend Harlan never let the incident inflate his ego. If anything, it made him quieter, more intentional. He knew how close he'd come to losing everything. Not just his position, but his calling. He told a friend over coffee one afternoon, "Sometimes you don't know what your ministry means to people until it's almost taken from you." His only indulgence was a single frame still from the live stream. Evelyn kneeling in prayer as morning. Light streamed behind her. He kept it in his study as a reminder of grace, fragility, and the thin line between perception and truth. As years passed, the live stream story became legend in Harmony Springs. Children learned about it growing up. Tourists admiring the stained glass often heard whispers of what happened there. The day the town almost tore itself apart, and how a phone camera prevented its fall. It wasn't about scandal anymore, but about how close-knit a community could become once forced to see itself clearly. The video, preserved by the church historian and featured in a regional news segment on small-town resilience, continued being shown in Sunday school as an example of grace under pressure and truth's importance. Years later, when Evelyn passed, away peacefully in her sleep, the town held a memorial service that packed the sanctuary and spilled onto the lawn. People spoke of her kindness, wisdom, and courage. But one speaker, now grown Alan Torres, said something that stuck with everyone. She lived like someone who knew the weight of a single moment. She didn't try to be famous or loud, but when her moment came, even without knowing it, she told the truth, and it saved a good man's life. After the service, people lit candles and placed them on the church's front steps. Light flickered across old wood, mingling with memories of what had been lost and found. Reverend Harlan served Harmony Springs for many more years. He never sought a bigger church or wider audience, staying where he was needed, where his voice had grown into the very walls around him. When he finally retired, the town threw a celebration, not with speeches or accolades, but with a community dinner under the stars. As people passed casseroles and cobblers down long tables lit with string lights, they didn't discuss the mistake the town once made. They talked about what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself, to walk through fire and emerge refined. And they remembered the morning when a woman prayed, a heart faltered, a town nearly judged too quickly, and a truth too powerful to ignore spoke, not with thunder, but with light streaming through stained glass and a camera quietly watching. A moment when a town found its faith, not just in God but in one another. A day Harmony Springs would never forget.